Alrighty, how's it going, everybody? I got motivated to make this video because I saw another video from another YouTuber on his channel, which sparked me to make this video. And I said, yeah. So I think he made some really good points. And I think it really sums up the whole deal about why I wanted to make this video myself. And the subject I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be home studios versus commercial studios, and in the box with plugins versus outboard gear and analog gear. Now, I'm going to start with the commercial studios first versus the home studios. And I wanted to say this. When I made the video about commercial studios going out of business and shutting down, and it's inevitable that it's going to happen, it's not, wasn't saying that a home studio, like in a house, in a bedroom, a garage, basement, whatever, is better. They are not. And I'll tell you why. They're not better ideally for recording. They're better economically for cost efficiency and affordability. That's it. When a commercial studio is built, they do everything they can with the acoustics when they're building it. They have studio designers and acousticians that come in and they analyze the room and say, okay, the room needs to be built like this. They have electrician guys that come in and they wire up the studio and they create star grounding systems and all kinds of, it's like the cabling and how the control room is built and how the live room is built and isolation booths are built and how they're all tied together and the wiring that you don't see. Along with lounges and bathrooms and reception areas and privacy fences and secured entrance, entering and all that. Most of us, when we have the home recording studio, we move into a house, a studio apartment, or an apartment, or we find something. It could be a trailer or a storage locker or whatever. But when it was first built, or in your house or whatever, it was never, your bedroom is a bedroom. The things that most people don't think about is, why do recording studios like a commercial studio work in the first place? Because it's designed that way. They had the mindset of recording bands and so forth. And then some people spend a lot of money converting buildings that were offices or whatever into like a recording studio or an old church or whatever. They still spend a lot of money to remodel it to turn it into a studio. So in a house, we have to do the same thing, with the acoustics and we have to come up with ways to make a bedroom, whatever case. But most of the time when there's a bedroom, ideally the bedroom's so small that it can only be a control room. And then sometimes our bedrooms are our control room and live room because we get to record in the same room or whatever. Like this room I'm in is definitely not big enough for if you were to actually build the ideal commercial studio. It's not. It's crowded in here because of all the gear and furniture and equipment and everything else. But another thing is they're thinking about when they talk about a commercial studio is how they're sound isolated, and they built the recording studios to contain the sound. That's why they have double doors and rooms within a rooms and floating rooms and so forth. You have to do a lot more work to make your home, and then on top of that, in a home, a residential area, you have to worry about noise coming within the house, such as a washer, or dryer, refrigerator, other people living in the home, or traffic on the outside. Loud helicopter flying over, or an ambulance, or a fire truck, or a police car driving by with the sirens going. You have to wear that, or neighbors, or loud barking dogs, or whatever. So you have to think about all that compared to a commercial building that most of the time they don't worry about that because they built the studio that way. So, I'm not saying anything that most people don't know. Everyone pretty much knows this. The reason why I was saying this, ideally, our commercial recording studio is definitely a better place to record. Because they've already worked out all the issues. They've already built it for that. But now, the reason I was making the reason I was making that a home studio, the reason I was saying with the home studio, the only reason a home studio is only better when it comes to saving money. That's the only advantage a home recording studio has. It's there because you don't have to worry about being on the clock. You don't have to worry about traveling anywhere. You can go in your home recording studio anytime you want. There's no calls you have to worry about being booked, and so forth. Now, another plus advantage to a commercial studio is most of the time they have a recording engineer and assistant engineers and a crew and a maintenance crew and everything else. Most of the time in your home, it's just you. You have to do everything. So that's the only downside, is you don't have the personnel or staff. There's the advantages and disadvantages to that as well. Like, for example, if you have a staff where there's a payroll. When it's your own studio, you're in worry about payroll because you are doing everything. Some home recording studios have some recording engineers, like people like myself. I can manage to do everything I need to do. If I want to record a client up here, I can do everything myself. I don't need to have a staff or a crew or maintenance crew because I can do everything myself. But when those commercial studios got multiple control rooms and live rooms and equipment fail or whatever, they don't have that luxury. So that's that's when it comes to the commercial studio versus the home studio. Now, when it comes to, which ties into gear, which means analog versus plugins. Not going to be very long on this. There's just a couple of things that both commercial studios and home recording studios have realized they both need. And that is a computer and at least the interface, an audio interface. They're just undoubtedly because the interface needs to talk to the computer for multi-tracking. We already know that's a ubiquitous thing right there. That is something every home or commercial studio needs. A Mac or PC and some sort of audio interface. It depends on your channel count. I/O as an example, input outputs. That's two are going to be undisputable. And the third thing would be that's going to be undisputable with that would be a DAW. Digital Audio Workstation. Whatever you choose. Pro Tools, Reaper, Logic, whatever you're going to use for your DAW. That's undisputable. Okay, so those are three things. Now, where it starts to get very, very vague is choice of gear and choices of software, and whether you decide to use software, outboard gear, analog gear, or a combination of both. And I would say this. It's gotten to the point where it comes to that, it's just everything is a choice. Because if you watch enough YouTube videos, and I'm sure pretty much everyone that watches YouTube, even ones that watch my channel, realize there is 10,000 options of everything when it comes to gear or plugins. It's so many options, and you got so many people trying to say whatever options or choices that they decided to go with is the best way to go. Yet, it's kind of like, it's like some people will have recording studios with no console. And then you'll go to other studios that will have consoles. You go to some studios, they're going to have Yamaha NS10s. Some studios don't have Yamaha NS10s. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Some studios will have ATC speakers in it. Some studios will have PMC audios in it. Some studios will have Dyne audio. Some will have Adams. Some studios will have JBLs. Some studios will have Focal. Some studios have Barefoots. Here's my question. When it comes to those different rod ranges of choices of studio monitors, or you're going to, like I said with those studios, some have an API, a legacy console. Some will have a Neve console. Some will have a vintage Neve console. Some will have a more modern Neve. Some will have an SSL 4000. Some will have an SSL 6000. SSL duality in this one. Or you'll go to that studio and they have an MCI console. Or they'll go to that studio have a Triton. Or that studio have a Helios. Or that studio has whatever the case. And, whatever. Or this studio, even when it comes to microphone choices, some studios prefer to use Neumann U87s for overhead on mics. Other ones decide they want to use Royal 121 ribbons or whatever, or they're going to use a SM57 on a top snare, or a Sennheiser 421 on a snare, or toms or whatever. Then some rather use these, or the microphones are even not even the same. Some people prefer to use the Sony 800 on vocals. Some rather use the U47 on vocals, or 251 on vocals, or whatever. An AKG C414 on vocals or whatever. And then there, choice of preamps, 1073s or whatever, or they decide they're going to use this compressor, 11 LA2A or an LA3A or LA4 or whatever. They're going to use a U-Ray, or they're going to use a Universe Audio, they're going to use Teletronics, or they're going to use, it just goes on and on and on. Distressor, or I'm going to use Pultex, or I'm going to use Lang EQs, or GML EQs, or the list is just ridiculous. And no two studios are the same when it comes to that. Yet, most of the time when we listen to the music, whether it was done on an API with Neumann mics, or done on a Triton with Telefunken mics, or was done on Neve with AKG mics or whatever, for the most part, if it's recorded well, the front end, if it's mixed well, and then if it's mastered, where it sounds good, I don't care what studio you went to, or they did it in a studio that didn't even have a console, and it's recorded well, mixed well, or they use outboard gear to mix it in a console, or they used it, decided to use Isotope or IK Multimedia or Slate or Waves or whatever plugins they decided to use. Most of the time, the average listener cannot hear the difference. Professional engineers and mixing engineers and recording engineers can barely tell the difference. It's kind of like if you use a Universe Audio 1176, a million times, then you eventually get used to hearing 1176 when it's being used on something, because you become familiar with how it sounds, the way it's compressed. But even with a Universal Audio 1176, because the way you set the attack and the way you set the output and the ratio, all buttons in, release and so forth, it's even then can make probably 200 or 300 different sounds off of one unit with just so many buttons. There's only very few pieces of gear like the LA2A where it has peak reduction and gain, where it's an optocell type of compressor that, for the most part, you don't have very many controls. So it's going to sound a certain way, period. You'll get used to hearing an LA2A on bass or vocals, whatever. It's just, versus when you have more options, you can shape the sound of stuff when you have more options. Especially you have a compressor that has more ratio control, threshold control, attack and release, makeup gain. When you have a lot more controls where you can really finesse 3.5 to 1 or whatever, yeah, that you can really. But for the most part, there's always going to be the argument of plugins sound just as good as outboard gear, or analog gear sounds better than plugins, or plugins sound, they're just, you can't tell the difference. There's always going to be hundreds of videos comparing certain pieces of gear. The thing is, when you got to be careful with these comparison videos, because they're only comparing maybe 4 or 5 compressors out of 100 of them. You would run out of time trying to compare every plug-in to every EQ to every compressor to every preamp to every microphone to every console to every acoustic, treated recording studio or home studios, and once again, there's so many combinations of and so many choices of everything in a recording studio as far as gear. There's so many choices of gear. That's why I've always made a video about, in the end, just pick something. It's really not going to be a huge difference, because what makes these songs sound good is the talent of the artist, the talent of the musicians, how good and how talented the engineers are. And I mean recording engineers, the mixing engineer, and the mastering engineer. Period. I got a few different brands of cameras downstairs. I got a Fuji, I got a Sony, I got some Nikons, I got some Canons. If I take a picture, it includes my smartphone, my Android. If I took that camera and took the photo of the same subject, pretty much with the same settings, the differences between all those photos will be so minute. The only obvious difference would be details with the DSLR cameras compared to a point and shoot camera versus compared to an Android, because of the sensor. The smaller the sensor, and that's in photography. So I don't want to get into details about that. But that's really the point of it. It's kind of like, you're always going to have pros and cons to software versus analog, period. The difference between analog, the problems with analog is analog gear can break. It can fail. It can not turn on. It can not work. It can fail. The problem with software is it can become corrupt. Hard drives can fail. Your RAM can fail. Your CPU can fail. the computer itself, the power supply can fail. Or software can be corrupted. You know, being connected to the internet, you can get a virus that can destroy your whole PC or your Mac. It's there's a whole bunch of factors. Or the audio interface can break. A bad channel. Your console, a channel can go out. A possible piece of outboard gear, it cannot work. A microphone can fail. Cables can fail. Plugins, because plugins are, you know, in software, because you have to download and your operating system is going to be, you know, upgrades or whatever. And sometimes your plugins or DAWs are no longer compatible with the newer operating system. And so you got to constantly do updates. There's pros and cons to everything. Another con to software is to constantly have to buy software and updates, because they're constantly updating these DAWs. They're constantly coming up with new versions of the plugins. And then sometimes you can plug, sometimes with the internet or whatever, and getting that software, sometimes you can't get. For example, I'll give you one last example on this. Ableton Live. I have Ableton Live 11 Lite. It's on this PC. It's on my other PC laptop downstairs, but I got my other PC downstairs. I can't get Ableton Live 11 because they're on an Ableton Live 12. So I went to say, okay, well, let me download Ableton Live 12 then. The problem with Ableton Live 12 is it's only compatible with the newer Windows system. I have Windows 10 on that. I need to read the specs. I think Ableton Live 12 is compatible only with Windows 11. So once again, every program and DAW that I got running on Windows 10, once I get a new PC, because I'm going to have to get a new PC because the PCs I got won't upgrade to Windows 11 because they're older PCs, and you need a certain PC to get Windows 11. You need a newer PC, which means that all my old stuff will not be able. Some of them won't transfer. And here's another problem. If I get new Windows 11, a lot of my older stuff that is in the cloud, or that's in, you know, when you, let's say you lose one of your programs, you have to go to the manufacturer's website to download a copy of your DAW or plugins or whatever. If your Windows, it may not download. It may not be able to go on your system. And now you're screwed because you're like, well, I got all these projects I was doing in the old one. I'm not compatible with the latest one. So now what do? It's kind of like, okay, let's say I was doing all these projects in Windows 11 Lite. And I needed, you know, because I got a new PC and I can't get Windows 11 no more because they're on Windows 11. I can't get Ableton Live Lite 12 on my other PC because it's not compatible. It's not compatible with Windows 10 on that. So now I have to go to Windows 11 to put down Windows 12, but I can't transfer the files because they're not compatible. That's the problem with software. It's the same thing with Mac. They're always constantly upgrading their operating system. That at one point you're going to eventually have to get a new Mac with the latest Mac operating system, where a lot of your old Mac software stuff will not work. That's the problem with being dependent on software. That's one issue. Also, another issue is, like I said, hard drives fail. If your hard drives fail where it won't even boot up, you're SOL. Especially if you got all your projects. A lot of people say that's why you want to back up your stuff to a cloud or whatever. And I get it. So some people are going to make the argument that's why, you know, we're having analog gear. Here's the thing, and I'll end on this note. If I was totally just dependent on my PC or my Mac with all my songs, and let's say they fail, and I needed to record some stuff, this is the reason why I still have ADATs right down here. And this is the reason why I still have it's the very reason why I still have over, you can't see it, but it's the very reason why I still have a 24 hard disk recorder. And I can record the old school way, right? I can still be able to record. It may be a little bit more tedious, but that's how they used to record anyway. They used to record to tape or ADATs or Tascams anyway. I just would go back and do something I'm very familiar with anyway, and I would just use my outboard gear. I got plenty of outboard gear, plenty of preamps, plenty of EQs, plenty of reverb units, plenty of compressors to just be console, tape, hard disk recorder, whatever, outboard gear. I wouldn't miss a beat. But if your computer dependent only, you may want to think about that, especially if you're doing a ton of recording. So that's going to do it for this video. Like I said, I was prompted to make the video. I was going to say hardware versus plugins. To end on that note between the two, one, I'm going to say once again, hardware or plugins, one is definitely not better than the other. Both have pros and cons, because it would be like you would only have cons with plugins and pros with hardware. But that would be impossible, because that means hardware would never fail. Hardware fail. That's the con of it. Another con to hardware would be you only have one of it. You have to get a lot of it to have more than enough, you know, whatever the case. This is why I always buy twos, at least twos, of certain brands of hardware analog gear, if not more. Because you always will need to have one or two, if not more, a backup or whatever. Once again, with plugins is you can buy one compressor and put it on 1,000 channels if you want to run 1,000 tracks. The only con to that would be software upgrades, compatibility, and another thing would be, once you start running a lot of plugins, is it eating up processing power from your PC or your Mac? Because it can, you know, if your Mac or your PC start getting bogged down with tons and tons of processing, it will start acting slow or lock up or everything else. And, you know, so you got to be careful with that too. This is why a lot of people say, well, I'm hybrid. Well, whether you have a lot of outboard gear, or some outboard gear, if you got some outboard gear, or if you got some outboard gear or a lot of outboard gear, you're hybrid, because most of the time you're probably recording to a DAW through an interface onto a PC or Mac. So you're going to be hybrid. Unless you are a tape only, console only outboard gear studio. Very, very few people are working like that, but there are some people like that. I would say out of all of that, all these studios, regardless of what gear they use, when you have people that know what they're doing, the results are almost always going to come out really, really good, no matter what the choices are. So that's going to do it for the video. Thanks for watching. And that's it. Y'all have a great one.